Another way we can make our web pages more interesting with CSS is to actually display the different elements with different fonts. If you notice our web page now, it looks a lot better now that it's the yellow font color on the green background, but the fonts pretty much are the same. We have our main title here and we have our slogan. Everything's the same there as far as the font is concerned, and if we scroll down, we can see even though these paragraphs are a lot smaller, it is the same font. Most web pages will change the fonts depending on the element, just to give it a little more variety. And we can do that very easily with CSS. There are some generic fonts that all browsers recognize, and they're called web-safe fonts, because if you were just to go into Word and say, okay, I think I like this font here, Microsoft Word has many different fonts, and if you try to put that in a web page, it might work in one browser, but it might not work in all browsers. So these web-safe fonts are guaranteed to work whether you're looking at a web page with an Android device or an Apple device or a Windows device. And the best place to find some information on them is this W3 School. So this is where I look for anything having to do with HTML or CSS. It's all here, and even JavaScript. Because these people, as I said, they make the rules for the web. The default font for most browsers is a serif font. Serif fonts look the best when you actually print pages out. So a printed page on paper, best font probably to use is one of these serif fonts. Serif means that, and I believe, since this is the default page right here, if I go back, this is a serif font. They have these little tiny, like you can see on the P, there's these little kind of squiggly things, and on the C you can see the little hooks. They're hooks, and that's the serif font. And they look best when they're printed. Actually, when you're reading small font, like paragraph font, a sans serif font actually would work better in that case. And we have several of the sans serif fonts here. Arial is one of the most common. Monospace is a font that is commonly used if you're writing code. So this would probably be a monospace type of font. Anyway, in order to put any of these in, these different fonts, first of all, we have to select which element we're going to do that with. I'm going to select the, I'm going to select the slogan, which was in H3. So the selector I'm using is H3. And then, of course, as I start the rule, the first thing I have to put in is the curly brace. And it gives me the closing brace. And then it opens up in my editor the exact amount of spaces I have to format it correctly. So it gives you 2 spaces there. The property is called font, and you can see it hinting, font family. And then when it knows I want to get a font family, it gives me several examples. I'm going to take this Comic Sans Serif, which is also down here, Comic Sans MS. I'm going to select that one. As you can see from the W3 Schools here, these are the 2 fallback fonts. Say for some reason, I can't really imagine what, this particular font, Comic Sans MS, is not on or in that particular browser's fonts, then we would fall back to cursive, which is a more generic font, or an even more generic font than that, which is sans serif. Okay, and then the rule ends with a colon. This property value pair ends with a colon. Okay, so let's take a look to see what changes once we do that. And as you can see, we have more of a cursive looking font here. This is our comic. And this is a good type of font for actual headings. you want to use a cursive type font or the fantasy type fonts that make more of an impact. Another rule that we can add is the property for the font size. And this can be specified a lot of different ways. It can be I'll put my colon there. I have to use the code in. It can be specified in pixels or inches, IN, or centimeters, CM, or Ms. We'll get into that later, EM. But for me, I'm going to specify it in pixels. What if I say 18? Let's see what kind of change that'll do on that slogan. So I'll save that rule and then reload it. Didn't see much of a change. What if I take it to 30? What would happen then? Let me save it. Okay, that's much too big. So I'm going to keep it back at 18 because we don't want it to be bigger than the heading itself. So we're going to leave it at 18 and save it. If you notice, if you looked at the W3 schools, let's remove some of these, there's not a lot to choose from there. And surely you've seen more fonts actually on the web itself. It used to be before CSS3, the actual version of CSS that we're using now. The older versions, you had to actually Photoshop. If you wanted a different font, you'd have to do a Photoshop image and put that in. And pages would be full of images, and that's not very good because images load a lot more slowly. But Google has kind of solved that by creating these Google fonts. And they're all different kinds of fonts. There's different categories. Let's look for one for a heading, let's say. And let's look for a, should I do a display? I'm just going to look for maybe, let's look at a display one maybe. Let's see what I get. Okay, some fancy looking ones. Let me see what I might like for a heading. For Garden Club. You can see there's just tons of them. Why don't I go with... sometimes there's too many choices. How about that? How about that? Okay, I kind of like that one. Okay, there's a little arrow here that says quick use. You can see the tooltip when I hover over it. So I'm going to open that up, and what it does is it will give me some code to add to this, which is right here. So as you can see, this is a link. It looks like a style sheet link, and pretty much it's very similar to that. So I'm going to copy this. Make sure I get it all. So Control C. And then, since it is that type of code, I'm going to put it actually up here after the title, before the style. So it goes outside the CSS itself, the internal style sheet, and we're going to actually add it to the head part before the style. This is all part of the head, of course, of our code, the non-displaying part. But this is where it goes. It goes between the title and your internal style sheet, or after the title in any other case. Now, the other thing we have to do is integrate it into the font at the actual level of the element we're going to use it. And I believe I'd like to use it for my H1 heading. So I'm going to open up a new rule here for H1. And basically I just come over here and copy this. Come on. And there we go. And then I'll save that, take a look at it, my page. Okay, so you see it's much changed now. It's using the Google font that has been linked to in my head over here. Okay, I'm going to come back to my H3 heading because there's one more rule that I'd like to touch on, and that's for the font weight. The font weight is pretty much, the default is normal, but you can also, if you want to bold the font, remember we use the strong tag for emphasis in the HTML5, but when we're coming to actually wanting to bold something, like some particular heading or whatever, we will use a style actually rule of bold. Alright, so now as you see, and we can save that and take a look at it too. It should be on the H3 heading. It should change a little in its weight, which it did. The thing here is when you get a bunch of font rules, there is a shorthand for it. So what we're actually going to do here now is open up a new line here, and we can actually use this shorthand property, font, and there's a rule that it has to follow a certain order. And this is a Google style rule. The weight comes first, and instead of putting font weight, we could just put bold, and then we would put a comma, and then we would put the font size next. The font size always comes next, comma, and then the font family comes last. And Google likes just a single, instead of a double quote, it likes a single quote there, so we're going to do that. By the way, if a font is several different words, then you have to put it in quotes like I just did. I don't know if I said that. And then our fallback here, cursive, and then serif. So once I've done that, I can get rid of all these rules. And this is just a convenient shorthand that allows you to not write so much. And anything that helps coders not code so much is just absolutely wonderful. And we'll reload it. And nothing much changed.